I'm Matt Brooker. I draw comics under the pen name Disraeli, and at the moment I'm drawing Scarlet Traces for 2000 AD. Scarlet Traces is a strip created by Ian Edginton and myself based on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. In that novel, Martians attempt to invade Victorian England, but they're killed off by disease. In a kind of minor stroke of genius, Ian noticed one little paragraph at the end of the book that no one had ever paid much attention to, that just said that the Victorians were taking the Martian technology apart and attempting to understand how it worked. From that, he came up with the idea of Scarlet Traces, which is a kind of Victorian murder mystery set in a Victorian London that's been rebuilt using re-engineered Martian technology. It has a kind of steampunk meets Hammer horror sort of vibe to it. Scarlet Traces was popular enough that we got to do a sequel called The Great Game. The Great Game is set in that world's 1940s, where they have interplanetary space travel, and the British are starting wars of conquest on other worlds. Now that Scarlet Traces has come to 2000 AD, we've had a new series commissioned called Scarlet Traces Cold War. That's set in the 1960s, and it gives us a chance to play with a lot of great 60s design and kind of pastiches of things like Jerry Anderson TV series that both Ian and I loved during our childhood. Another forgotten element of Wells' novel War of the Worlds was that the Martians invade Venus at the end of the book. This means in Cold War that we have Venusian refugees living in England, adapting to British society, and in turn causing British society to adapt to them. In a nod to genuine history, we've actually got Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, this time, however, directed at alien incomers. So the page we're going to be looking at is a big double-page spread, and it's the massing of Earth's fleets above the moon. Because this is such a big, complicated piece, I'm going to use 3D models as a basis for the drawings. This will allow me to get the spaceships consistent from whatever angle we see them, and also to design spaceships that are much more complicated than I'd usually be able to draw, especially if I'm having to draw lots of them at one time. 3D modelling can seem like a soulless activity, but in fact, in a lot of ways, I just start with a rough idea of what I want to do and kind of doodle in 3 dimensions until I get the sort of object that I want. Although it seems like using 3D models should make things much quicker, you still have to spend quite a lot of time positioning the models and also using the right sort of virtual camera to get the kind of angles that you want for each shot. Once I've got everything in position, I actually just take a screen grab. I don't bother making a proper render from the final model. Because I work digitally, I can just paste the screen grab that I've made straight into Manga Studio and work over the top of it using it as a basis for a drawing. Although it's possible to make outline renders of models, which would be very quick, that wouldn't match up with the sort of drawing that I do. So in fact what I do is I hand ink everything, and there's a kind of deliberate incorrectness to what I do. I'm actually trying to put in the same sort of little errors and wibbles that I put in when I'm drawing stuff by hand. As well as the big scene with the models, there are also some smaller panels where a BBC reporter is describing the scene to a television audience. This guy's based on a real-life BBC reporter called Alan Wicker, and so aside from trying to create a likeness of him, I've also at the same time got to fit that in with my own style of drawing so that it doesn't look too jarring. I really enjoy drawing little details like the tattered spacesuit of the BBC cameraman and the little arm inside his helmet that gives him a cigarette to smoke. That's actually something that Ian put into the script. Once the inking is completed, I try and keep the colouring as simple as possible. Otherwise, you end up with this kind of dazzling sea of detail and you can't actually tell what you're meant to be looking at. I'm using black shading here with the airbrush tool to get the sense of deep shadows on rounded forms that you would see in space. Normally, I tell people to both avoid using black shading and to avoid using the airbrush tool, simply because that's what everybody uses when they start out. But it just goes to show there's an exception to every rule. One of the things I had to think about very carefully was how dark to make the space background. Space should actually be completely black, but since the spaceships have got deep black shadows on them, they tend to disappear against the background. So I actually spent quite a lot of time lightening and darkening the picture to try and make them stand out just enough. Now that I work digitally, I can actually take pages to completion without fear of spoiling them. If I find that I've added too much to a page, I can just remove it. Previously, when I was working with ink and paint, I'd often abandon pages a little bit before they were finished, just for fear of overworking them and spoiling them. This is the finished piece with all the spaceships in place. These days, comics are competing against, these big budget Hollywood blockbuster movies that have literally hundreds of special effects people working on them. But as a comic artist, I'm trying to recreate something of the feel of that with basically just me in a back bedroom somewhere. Because I've worked on Scarlet Traces for so long now, it's been something like 20 years, I actually feel in a way like I'm competing with my younger self. The me who drew Scarlet Traces back in the early 2000s was younger, had more energy and far fewer commitments, so it was easier for me to put far more into the pages than I can now. At the same time, I've got more experience, so hopefully the two things balance out and I'm still producing something that's consistent with the earlier work. I feel tremendously privileged to be doing the job that I'm doing and to produce the body of work that I have. This is a job that still lets me grow creatively, and for as long as I possibly can, I'm going to keep doing it. See you in the funny pages.